YouTube, how's it going? The Goat House is back. Today I have 10 NFL players, big-time NFL players that could surprisingly get cut this offseason. There's always surprising moves, surprising cuts. Teams sometimes desperate to clear space. So we're going to break down these 10 players that may get cut and what the cap savings would look like for each of these teams. We got videos like this already up on the channel. Definitely more to come. We have a recent top 10 free agents with landing spots video that just went up. Check that one out. We're going to have a live stream Friday, tomorrow. Super Bowl picks, awards, and a lot more Q&A giveaway. So turn notifications on. Don't forget to do that. Follow us on Twitter. A lot of live news, rumors, updates on that Twitter. Always talking with you guys. It's on your screen. There's also a link pinned in the comments. There's also links pinned in the comments for anything else you're looking for. Sponsors, GLD Shop, Liquid IV. Got the Vikings chain on from the GLD Shop. They have all NFL teams and more. I'm going to talk about 2 Vikings in this video, actually. But first one we'll get Derek Carr out of the way, because it might not be super shocking, because it was kind of reported. We talked about it on Twitter. It was reported maybe a few weeks ago that if the Raiders cannot trade Derek Carr by February 15th, it is, February 2nd right now as I'm recording this video. It's coming up. They can't trade him by February 15th. They're probably going to cut him. So maybe this isn't that shocking of a guy to be on this video. But, and we talked about on Twitter why February 15th. He has guarantees. His salary for this upcoming year fully guarantees, plus $7.5 million of next year. So a lot of money there. So the Raiders don't want to be stuck with that. So they want to trade or cut him by that date. But it still is a little surprising, like, if he ends up getting cut, because this is a legit quarterback. I know he had an off year. A lot of quarterbacks had off years, though, especially this year. He was better than a handful. I mean, a long list of quarterbacks that played this year. And he was fantastic down the stretch of last season to get the Raiders in the playoffs. So I think teams still, coaches still think highly of a guy like Derek Carr. So for him, I think it's surprising if he gets traded for undervalue and then let alone get cut. It'd be pretty wild. But I guess it's a possibility because they have that deadline and it's coming up. And there's no trade yet. This week or so before the Super Bowl, leading up to the Super Bowl, usually when things start to heat up with things like this, or possibly right after the Super Bowl too. So going to be interesting. But if the Raiders do cut him, they would clear $29.25 million. So a pretty decent contract, because usually these big-time quarterbacks are just big-time players in general. When you cut them at some point, unless it's deep down the contract, you end up losing money or saving very, very little. So I guess a good contract, a good big contract here where you're able to clear 29.25, but they won't be able to do that if he's traded or cut after February 15th. So that's the date to watch out for there. But a guy that you would think has some value could actually get cut from the Raiders here. Next guy we're talking about here, KHALIL MACK. Now, I think all these on this video are possible. They are realistic. I definitely think some more than others. If I had to predict, I don't think KHALIL MACK would be cut because he had a really good year. He's too good of a player, but it's possible. The Chargers are in a bit of a hole when it comes to the cap space. They don't have a long list of ways to clear a lot of cap space. Of course, they can cut some players here and there that won't clear them this amount. They can restructure some contracts. But KHALIL MACK, if cut, remember he's getting up there in age. If cut, you actually can clear a whopping $18.4 million. So that is a lot there. Maybe, he was really good for them last year. Maybe they're thinking he's getting up there in age. We got some other pass rushers. Maybe we'd rather get a cheaper one to pair with Joey Bosa. It's a possibility. Maybe we want to focus on offense a little bit more, making sure it's as good as we think it could be, because it's supposed to be very good. So I think it's a possibility. It's a lot of cap space, and they're in the negative. They're over the cap by a little bit here, so that could help them. So this is an interesting one. Not one I'm fully counting on, but it's possible, and it's why it's on this video. It's possible, and it would be a big-time surprise to a lot of people. So definitely an interesting one there. Next up, we got Hunter Henry and the Patriots. The Patriots, they value the tight end position, and they, by so much, that they went out and got Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith in the same offseason to pretty big contracts. Jonnu Smith's contract structured in a way where it's very difficult to move on from him this offseason. they possibly can make him a post-June 1st cut. But Hunter Henry, if they cut him without making that post-June 1st cut just right away, it would give them $10.5 million. So that is quite a bit. So Hunter Henry, and mainly people, especially Patriots fans, talking about Jonnu Smith. He's such a weapon, and there was big plans with him. They may try to get him to work. Maybe he fits that Bill O'Brien offense a little bit, and it's a little trickier cutting him to clear space. You would actually lose money just with your normal cut. It would have to be post June 1st. Hunter Henry, a little bit easier to deal with here, and they could be going for another tight end that maybe they feel is better, cheaper possibly. So 10.5 savings is quite a bit for Hunter Henry here, so that is a possibility. Patriots have a lot of cap space, so I guess they could afford to wait for the June 1st savings for a guy like Jonnu Smith, and they can spend their money elsewhere, but they probably want to do some damage. They brought in Bill O'Brien. Now's their time. It sounded like they thought about hiring him last year. Now they hire him when they have a lot of cap space. They want to fix this offensive line a bit. They want to fix the weapons, whether it's receiver, tight end position, and then defense. Making sure that's set as well. I'm not really worried about the defense a whole lot, though. So maybe adding more cap space to what they already have here would make some sense. So looking out for those tight ends in New England Patriots this offseason should be pretty interesting. Corey Davis, I've actually talked about this in the past. It's a possibility here, which was one of their bigger signings a couple offseasons ago. And he's a solid receiver. He's been a little underwhelming for the Jets, but the quarterback play has been insanely underwhelming. That is kind of a reason for it, but it felt like they weren't using him a whole lot. We saw some injuries. I mean, they were using him a bit, but not a whole lot, like living up to the contract. And there was some, durability issues here and there, but definitely using a guy like Garrett Wilson more, and then Elijah Moore as well. So they could move on from Corey Davis, clear $10.5 million. So you kind of can it's a final year's contract. So you definitely can get out of most of that there, which, kind of would be okay to do, to move on from them and get that money. And they're around even when it comes to the cap space. They definitely want to clear some more, and here's a kind of an easy way to do it. But they thought highly of him, and he is talented. If they get the right quarterback in there, then you kind of want to use Corey Davis, but you can get away with not having him if you have those other weapons as well. So it might be a tough decision there for the Jets, but it's a possibility, and he should have a market if he's available. Next, we're going to talk about two Vikings. Eric Kendricks, which we talked a little bit about in the past as well. If the Vikings cut him, they would clear $9.5 million. It's a little bit of a tricky one, too, because he was one of the better linebackers in the league for a bit. And then this year, he was not so much, not even close, actually. He struggled a bit, and they did switch schemes. So, yeah, he definitely fits that 4-3 a little bit better. But is he declining? That's kind of a question mark. I think in the right scheme, he definitely can go back to the way he was playing. So it's probably going to depend on who the Vikings bring in as their defensive coordinator. But at the same time, they are very, bad news for the Vikings. They are very low on cap space, so low that they're very far in the negative, like around negative 20 million or so, 23 million, negative 23. But the good news is, somewhat good news, is they do have a variety of ways to clear cap space, and kind of a lot of it. But it's sort of good news because you probably have to move on from some pretty good players, or guys that were at least pretty good for them in the past. So Kendricks being one of them. So $9.5 million. I think a lot will ride on who they bring in as defensive coordinator. He definitely did not work out in that last game, but it was so poorly coached that a lot of guys didn't work out. I mean, a lot of players that were used to being good. Danielle Hunter, Kendricks. I thought Harrison Smith was all right still. But players like that. So we'll see what happens here. Vikings are looking for ways to clear space. Here's a little bit more of a surprising one maybe to most people for the Vikings. Their running back, who was known as their star running back, DALVIN Cook. If they cut him, they clear $7.89 million, which, I mean, you could argue is a lot, or is it not a lot? It's a lot of money. But for a running back like DALVIN Cook, maybe you would say it's not a whole lot. I did feel like he took a step down this year. They were more of a pass-first offense compared to the recent years where they were not. Run blocking maybe wasn't as good, but he did look like he took a little bit of a step down. Maybe some fumbling issues as well. And again, the Vikings are pretty desperate for cap space, but there are ways to clear it, just like DALVIN Cook here. So it is a possibility. I don't think anybody would trade for. I think teams would love to have DALVIN Cook as their running back, but I don't think anybody would trade for him because you got to trade a pick, and then you got to pay something, a decent amount, while there's other free agent running backs available in a pretty loaded draft class. You'd rather get a guy that you don't really have to trade anything for, perhaps. Maybe there could be a team. There isn't a long list of teams that are desperate for running back right now, though. I guess you don't have to be desperate, but this is an interesting one. But then who would the Vikings go with that running backs? Remember, Alexander Madison is a free agent, and then it was weird because whenever they would use Madison, it looked pretty good, but then there was a lot of games where they just only give him a couple carries, so they really valued Cook way above everyone else, obviously. So interesting decision with some of these players with the Vikings who are looking to get out of being over the cap, meaning negative. Next guy we're talking about, another running back. We're going to talk about a couple more running backs. Here's one, Aaron Jones of the Packers. A pretty decent amount, more than Dalvin Cook would clear. It would be $10.46 million for the Green Bay Packers if they move on from their star running back. So this would be a little surprising too, but it's somewhat possible. I mean, they do have A.J. Dillon there. They are in a little bit of a hole when it comes to the cap space, so they're looking for ways to clear space. They don't really have a whole lot of ways, but they do have one big way if they trade Aaron Rodgers, but they would have to make him a post-June 1st cut, so they wouldn't get, or trade, so they wouldn't get that cap space till after that, or to June 1st, on that point there, that date. So they want to find ways to clear space pretty much right away. They'll probably restructure some contracts, but could they move on from Aaron Jones, who's very important to them, and they like him a lot, big-time weapon. There's some times where you're watching the game and you go, where's Aaron Jones? Maybe a little bit too much A.J. Dillon. So maybe they're willing to do it. The way they structured that contract was to make this decision by right now. He's too talented, and he's not. It doesn't look like he's declining at all. So it's tough to see the Packers doing it, but they may do it because it's a lot of savings on the line here with over $10 million, which is pretty good for a running back, especially when you already have another running back. And maybe Aaron Rodgers, the other Aaron, maybe the decision with him plays a part in this because they move on from Aaron Rodgers. You could say they're in somewhat of a retool. I wouldn't say rebuild, retool mode. Where, okay, maybe we could afford to move on from Aaron Jones as well because it's Jordan Love, A.J. Dillon time. We're looking for another cheap young running back in the draft, add some other weapons. So I could see it that way. Or you could argue opposite. You can argue they move on from Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love. We need to see if he's the guy or not right now. So it's supply him with the weapons, not take them away from him. So you kind of can argue both sides there. But interesting decision. This one isn't being talked about a whole lot. I know some Packers fans may be throwing it out there a little bit. But quite a bit of savings there. And another running back, which is starting to get talked about a little bit, I think it's more so, will this guy take a pay cut? I've seen that on Twitter. That's Joe Mixon. So maybe a similar situation as the Vikings here in terms of how much savings, but a different situation where the Vikings might be desperate for cap space. The Bengals actually will not be that desperate for cap space. They actually have a bit, a good amount there. For a pretty damn good team, too. And, of course, they do want to fix that offensive line. They want to make a decision on their safeties. Both their safeties are free agents, and then they are planning on some big extensions for the near future, but that won't take any of this year's cap space, so keep that in mind as well. But Joe Mixon, sometimes a little disappointing. Sometimes it's because the run blocking. Sometimes it's because they're just for sure a pass-first team. But when Mixon gets his opportunity, he looks pretty good. But there's sometimes he gets the opportunity and P. Ryan looks just as good. Maybe sometimes better, actually, even though he's not better. But sometimes, because Mixon's a little more dynamic, a little more to his game. But the Bengals could move on from Mixon and save that $7.261 million. Maybe look for a cheaper running back in free agency or grab one in the draft. They could even use a first or second round pick on a guy, would be cheaper, and that could make some sense. And then put a lot of their money towards bringing back a safety or two and signing some more offensive linemen or drafting some more guys. But they're not going to be desperate. The Bengals, they could keep him. It's not going to be that much of a problem. They're going to sit down and say, would we rather have 7.261 or rather have Joe Mixon? Is Joe Mixon playing up to that point, especially when we're valuing the pass a little bit more? Maybe they're saying it's a little more important to us, to improve that offensive line for not only pass blocking, but for run blocking as well, because if the run blocking is better, then we can actually have a lesser running back than Mixon, and the running game is better. It's kind of showing where the value of the running back position is and how valuable offensive line is right there. So interesting decision when it comes to Cincinnati Bengals. But remember, they're pretty good situation with the cap space. So I'm excited about them, and they just really shouldn't be that at all desperate, but we'll see what they decide to do with something like this here. And then next we got Romeo OKWARA, who isn't really a huge name recently. He did have some really good years there as a pass rusher. In the last couple of years, we haven't seen the full dose of Romeo OKWARA, other pass rusher. Now we're seeing a lot of young guys. Now we're seeing Aiden Hutchinson, and we're seeing Houston, and Harris broke out last year. They'll have him back this year too. So they got a number of guys out there, and then Pashaw's the guy that can move around a bit. But they have a number of solid young guys out there, so they could afford to do this. They have a decent amount of cap space. Not one of those teams that I'd say is desperate, but they want to go. They want to make that big leap this year, so they could afford to add a little bit more cap space. So you can move on from OKWARA and add 7.5. Now you could say pretty good pass rushers like OKWARA. They're pretty damn valuable. They're pretty damn expensive. So maybe they will view him as more valuable than $7.5 million. But is he going to be on the field? Is he even going to be starting? So that's the tough decision there. But I could definitely see this one happening. This is one I definitely could see happening. They would clear $7.5 million, and that could kind of help them have a pretty big offseason here, where I think they'll be looking at interior defensive line, linebackers, maybe a corner, whether it's slot or outside. We will see. So very interesting team to watch. And then one more, Tennessee Titans, who are interesting team. They are a team that is in the hole, over the cap, negative cap when it comes to heading in this offseason, but they have some very easy ways to clear space. You're moving on from some pretty decent players, but they have obvious ones. I know they're big name players, but they're going to cut Taylor Lewan. They're going to cut Robert Woods. It's unfortunate that didn't work out. Probably Zach Cunningham as well. But Bud Dupree is an interesting one. They very well could cut him, and they would clear a pretty good amount, $9.35 million, and that'll all add up. They'll go from one of the teams with lower amount of cap space to one of the teams with the most cap space, actually, if they make all these moves or the obvious moves. So, and then they could have a big offseason, which they're looking for. Will they keep an eye on the quarterback situation? But they're looking for offensive linemen for sure. That's a big one, and receivers. But this is a tough decision because Bud Dupree, when on the field, is a pretty good player. I think he's a difference maker because he moves around a bit. I think he creates for other players. He gets production himself, but he creates for other players. I really like Dupree as a player, and I really like him specifically as a fit with that Titans defense. The problem is, over the last 2 years, he has missed some time. So, and I think Dupree, talent-wise, is more valuable then definitely way more valuable than the $9.35 million. But you got to sit down and say, hey, is he going to be on the field? Would we rather have that $9.35 million? We need to try to add up this. And they can get away with not cutting him because, again, they'll cut Luan, they'll cut Woods, and then probably Cunningham. Maybe it's a decision between Dupree or Cunningham. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. I think one of them probably happens. So tough decision here. If he was healthy, this wouldn't even be a question. He'd be on the team. And they're going to get Harold Landry back, and they had Danico Autry playing off the edge as well. But, man, when they had Dupree and Landry off the edge and Autry moving around a bit on the inside, it was damn deadly. It's just health is the big issue with the Tennessee Titans. We saw that this past year. So tough decision here. The Titans are probably the biggest, maybe not the biggest team, but maybe the most active team to watch when it comes to cuts on notable players. Again, the bad news is that we talk about the Vikings. It's almost the same thing as the Vikings. The Titans and the Vikings have the same amount of cap space, which is negative 23. They're towards the very bottom of the NFL. The Saints and the Bucs are underneath them for sure. But both teams have ways to clear space. You don't have to. Some teams have to restructure contracts or don't, have to make cuts they really don't want to. Both those teams have ways to clear space. I think the Titans are in a way better situation. Even though they're the same, I think they're in a way better situation because the Vikings have some very tough decisions. We really don't want to cut that guy. Maybe we got to cut him. The Titans, there's some obvious cuts like we talked about that they will make, and they will actually get to a pretty decent amount of cap space. So, if you're looking through, if you're, like me, getting ready for the offseason, and you're looking through all these teams, you're probably like, God, I don't like what I see from the Titans there with that cap space. They're in a bad situation. in a snap of a finger as we get close to free agency, they're going to be flipped. So that's a team that people are going to kind of realize, like, oh, that's different. You know, they kind of change your mind on that team. So that's an interesting team for sure. So those are my 10 players that could actually surprisingly get cut. I'm not predicting all of these to happen. I definitely think some of them will happen. You know, for sure. I think some of these got to happen, you know, but there's always surprises. There's things that surprise me, and that's the beauty of the offseason as well. So we'll see what happens here. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments. There's some guys that I were kind of borderline put on this list. You know, some guys that actually think will get cut, but are they that much of a surprise? You know, are they that much of a surprise? Guys like Robbie Anderson, William Jackson, you know, players like that. You know, but we're always, you know, especially on Twitter, we're always keeping you guys up to date with these things, these predictions. And then we have long list of videos here already out, and then more to come covering the offseason. It's my favorite. It's my favorite time of the year. Unless my team was in the Super Bowl, that'd probably be my favorite time of the year. But it is a great time because we got all this stuff happening, and we got the Super Bowl right around the corner. We got you covered for all of it. So like, subscribe, turn notifications on. Make sure to turn those notifications on because we have a live stream coming up, and then that way you won't miss that or any of the videos. Follow our Twitter. Very, very important to follow that. Super followers / subscribers get more content. So link pinned in the comments for that and anything else you're looking for. That's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.